Hi, Cineflix Recapped here. Today, I am going to recap the full plotline of a South Korean movie called Amuse. This movie tells a story of an old lonely writer. His life is turned upside down with the arrival of a 17-year-old girl who starts working at his home. How will their love story unfold? Let's find out. The film starts by showing us the life of a 70-year-old man by the name of Lee, who lives alone, up in the mountains, where he spends most of his days writing. From his flashback, it is revealed that he is a famous writer and also teaches literature at a university. One day, on his way back from work, he sees a young girl with wounds around her knee, sleeping in a reclining chair in front of his house. Soon after, a young man by the name of Ji-woo, who happens to be a student of Lee, arrives and accidentally awakes her. The girl is revealed to be Eun-gyo. They look confused and ask her why she is here. She replies that she accidentally noticed a stairway and decide to rest there. She tells them that she lives nearby. She then saying goodbye and leaves. Later on, we will find out that Ji-woo turns out to be a well-known writer as well, and he pays Lee visit regularly to care for him as gratitude for his past kindness. Ji-woo is having a chat with Lee and he mentions that he met Eun-gyo again. He tells Lee that she is looking for a job, and that she can do any housework. In short, Lee tells Eun-gyo to come on Saturday and become his housemate. From that day forward, Eun-gyo regularly arrives to clean the house. Their relationship seems wholesome in the beginning. On one occasion, when she is vacuuming the study, she bumps into a pile of paper. Lee happens to be observing her from upstairs, and immediately comes down to help her. He also helps her vacuuming and arrange the book. Eun-gyo feels guilty at that time. One day, before heading to Lee's house, Eun-gyo makes herself look nice and lifts her skirt above the knees. She then cleans the house as usual, but this time still dressed in her school uniform, which she does on purpose. Lee notices her and can't help but find it to be very arousing to him. Lee and Eun-gyo often have a conversation together. As the days go by, Eun-gyo feels more and more attracted to Lee, mainly because she is impressed by the beautiful words that Lee often utters. Even during her class, the thought of Lee can't escape Eun-gyo's mind. One rainy night, Eun-gyo arrives soaking wet at Lee's door. She then asks for his permission to let her stay overnight in his home, as she is having an argument with her parents. Feeling bad for her, Lee lets her spend the night. While helping her dry her clothes, Eun-gyo starts teasing Lee subtly, and Lee is starting to fall for it. Eun-gyo is sleeping in separate rooms that night. When Lee wakes up the next morning, he finds Eun-gyo under the blanket in his bed, and notices an eagle-like tattoo on her chest. As he is running his finger through it out of curiosity, he hears Ji-woo coming and abruptly rushes to his work desk. Ji-woo is shocked to find Eun-gyo in Lee's bedroom, and asks her where Lee is. Ji-woo suspects that something is going on between Eun-gyo and Lee, so he warns Lee to keep his distance and reminds him that she is only 17. One day, the three of them go out for a hike. In the middle of the hike, Ji-woo pulls Eun-gyo aside, and advises her to stop working at Lee's house. But little does he know that Lee has already handed her a house key. Later, Eun-gyo is tidying her hair with a mirror. When Ji-woo shouts at her and startles her, it causes her to drop the mirror to the bottom of the cliff, which is far from their reach. She starts crying out at him and tells him that he made her lose her mother's heirloom. Lee walks up to them and slowly climbs down the cliff to grab the mirror, and hands it to her. And then they share a hug in front of Ji-woo. The next day, Eun-gyo persuades Lee to get a tattoo like hers on his chest. As she is sketching it, the old man's imagination starts to go wild, where he sees himself as his younger self, and having a romantic relationship with her. Since that day, Lee starts to write fictional stories about his relationship with Eun-gyo. Meanwhile, Ji-woo is under a lot of stress because he hasn't finished his script. So he calls Eun-gyo and asks her to bring him a flu medication. When she arrives, Ji-woo ends up confronting her about the mirror incident the other day. Moreover, he tells her not to disturb Lee anymore. They argue all night into her defense. She tells him that Lee is the one who keeps inviting her over. The following day, Eun-gyo and Ji-woo are talking in Lee's study, when suddenly Eun tries to move Lee's drawer. Ji-woo stops her from doing so, because he knows Lee would not be happy with people rearranging his belongings. They argue for a while, and they both start to push it back and forth. As none of them wants to back down, it eventually topples down and opens. Ji-woo accidentally notices the script. that Lee wrote about his imaginary scenarios with Eun. Later that night, Ji-woo discreetly takes the script and begins reading it, as it gradually piques his interest. As each day passes by, Eun and Lee get even closer to one another. They even spend a lot of time together. One night, Lee is visited by a man who asks him regarding Ji-woo's whereabouts. The man also mentions that Ji-woo's new book is rising in popularity, and that the book's title is Eun-gyo. Lee is taken aback upon hearing the name and walks to his study to look for his script. He is relieved when he sees that it is still in his drawer, but he is still not convinced. So he heads to a bookstore to search for Ji-woo's book. And as he suspected earlier, the story in the book is very familiar, confirming that it is actually based on his fictional writing about Eun-gyo. The next morning, as Ji-woo is bringing over a tea to Lee, he lashes out to Ji-woo on the matter, admitting that his intention has always been to keep the story to himself. Ji-woo tries to justify his actions by telling him that it would be a shame for such a beautiful story to just rot in his shelf. Lee, who is already overwhelmed by anger, ignores his reasoning and harshly casts Ji-woo out of his house. Eun-gyo witnesses this happening and quickly flees out of fear. That night, Eun-gyo visits Lee as usual. All of a sudden, Lee acts infuriated towards Eun-gyo and locks the door to prevent her from coming inside. Eun-gyo notices a book with Eun-gyo written on the cover. She grabs it and leaves. The next day, at school, her mind is constantly burdened by what she reads in the book. On the way home, she approaches Ji-woo at his house because the book Eun-gyo is written by him. Eun-gyo shows him her appreciation for depicting her so beautifully in the book. Later that night, Ji-woo invites Yoon inside his car. He is feeling lonely and tries to kiss her. However, Eun-gyo rejects his advances and leaves. Days later, Lee is grieved with such loneliness. And while he is doing Eun-gyo's work, he starts to hallucinate about her. A few days later, Eun comes over to celebrate Lee's birthday. As the two are preparing dinner, Ji-woo arrives at the door, much to their surprise, and tells them that he just wants to give a birthday present to Lee. Ji-woo asks permission to leave when Lee stops him, and asks him to stay with him to join the party. Lee becomes drunk throughout the night and tells Ji-woo and Eun to go home before dozing off. Shortly, he wakes up to a noise coming from inside the house. Curious, he goes outside and uses a ladder to peek inside his study. Before his very eyes, Ji-woo and Eun-gyo were having sex. Later that night, after Ji-woo falls asleep, he goes out to his car to contemplate. All of a sudden an idea pops up in his head to deflate Ji-woo's car tires and unscrew the bolts from his own car wheel. As expected, the next day, Ji-woo is on his way home when he realizes he has a flat tire, so he drives back to get Lee's car instead. However, the car feels unstable, so he drives to an auto repair shop, where the guy tells him that someone must have unscrewed the bolts from his own car wheel. Ji-woo realizes it's Lee, and he storms off with the intention to confront him. During the way, he is so flooded with anger that he loses control. He crashes violently, ending his life at that very moment. Days later, Eun-gyo is in a bookshop when she comes across Ji-woo's published book, Eun-gyo. That's when she recognizes something odd. The story resembles her interaction with Lee during her time working there. She figures out that Lee must have written the book and not Ji-woo. Knowing this, she brings a flower and goes to visit Lee to express her gratitude, only to find the house in a state of complete mess, with wine bottles scattered all over the floor. She finds Lee lying down in his room, and tells him that she has read the book. She thanks him for portraying her so gracefully in the book, but at the same time, they realize that they will never be together. Eventually, she bid him farewell, telling him that she will never return. As those words enter Lee's ear, a tear rolls down his eyes and he starts to cry. And the movie is over. Thank you for watching.